Hello and welcome back to Dishelved with Adam White. I'm doing my second part of Michael K. Vaughan Made Me Read It. Uh, am I using his and Criminoli's names slyly in my post just to try to get some more traffic on my site? Yes, it's a blatant, shameful attempt to do that. But I did actually want to read some of the books they'd suggested because I seem to have some similar reading tastes and ways with the two of them, and some I don't. But I wanted to give a chance to some of this stuff, and some of the stuff I really liked, and uh, some of it I had was kind of half and half with. But today, the first thing I'm going to talk about is Demons by Daylight by Ramsey Campbell. I just literally finished reading this, and I really couldn't tell you what it's about. The back says, "Open this book and step into terror. At first sight, a mysterious man and his furtive lover enter the never-opened door upstairs." Which, even that doesn't exactly happen exactly that way, so I don't know why they say that. The Franklin paragraphs: "A specialist in horror leaves a chilling legacy from the grave. The Guy. A national holiday takes a frightening new dimension. Concussion. One man's reality crumbles shockingly on a bizarre bus ride. Made in Goatswood, an army of mute sentinels spring to vengeful life. Plus 7 more excursions into the eerie world of Ramsey Campbell, an incomparable collection from beyond and back." I don't know. The cover doesn't seem to have anything to do with the book. It's a book of short stories. The back sort of says what goes on in some of the stories. Um, Overall, I just really didn't get it, I guess. Maybe it's me, maybe it's the book. Um, when I look through it back on the first part, I have trouble remembering anything. The first section is called Nightmares, and there's stories called Potential, The End of a Summer's Day, At First Sight, and The Last Hand. Only one of them do I remember anything from. And I just started reading it the other day. Um, they seemed like fragments from a bigger story. Each short story seemed like a fragment of something that should have been longer so that you understood what it was about. And that was a problem throughout the whole book. Um, and I just really didn't get these first ones. They just blew right past me. um, I do remember some of The Last Hand, the guy's on a train and ends up playing cards with a group of people that are making bets, and he's betting away all his money, and uh, it takes a dark turn, but I'm not really sure how it turns out. And I mean, I remember what the words on the page said, but I just didn't really understand it. Um, so that's all I'll say about Nightmares. Is it was kind of a nightmare to read because I really didn't get it. The next section is called Errol Undercliffe, a tribute. It says that it's the Franklin paragraphs and The Interloper by Errol Undercliffe. I wasn't certain whether this, because the one is an essay, the Franklin paragraphs, and the other is The Interloper, said to be by Errol Undercliffe, not Ramsey Campbell. I don't know if that's true. I didn't see anything to give me an indication whether this was just uh, something that really happened and he put this in here in the middle of this book, or if um, this was just completely made up and it was part of the stories in the book. I don't know. Nothing in it indicates whether it was actually real or not. And The Interloper, that it's said to be by a different author, was actually probably the clearest story of the bunch. uh, which is kind of funny because maybe it actually was by somebody else. I don't know. But if not, he wrote it in a way that it was written in a clearer prose than what his other stuff was. The last section was called Relationships. These were a little bit clearer maybe than the Nightmares section. They all had some kind of relationship at the center of each of these. Some of the relationships I'm not quite sure about. Um, the one made in Goat's Wood, that one stood out as one that made a little bit more sense. This guy goes to a place called Goat's Wood and buys these little pagan looking demon trolls for his girlfriend's garden, and they come to life and bad things happen. Uh, and it had an underlying theme of religion, and I kind of got that one. That one I understood, and it seemed to have a it seemed to have a little bit clearer thing to it. But um, Reply Guaranteed, uh, that one I just read like 20 minutes ago, and it's already left me. The names of the people seem to change. And it seemed he used the same names a lot of times in the different stories, and it led to confusion to me. Uh, the text itself was confusing to me. The very last one that I just now read, The Telephones, is about a guy who gets refused service at a bar because he's got long hair. And then he's seemingly stalked by public telephones. And that was the whole story. I, I don't know. I don't get it. So maybe, like I said, it could be me. Uh, it might be the book, but I really tried hard to get into this book, but I just couldn't do it. Um, I mean, I'm glad I read it and gave it a chance. And like I said, a couple of them, like Maiden Goat's Wood, I did kind of like those. But overall, I would have to say that I didn't understand this, and uh, I just would have to give this a pass. I probably won't be reading any more by Ramsey Campbell, uh, but like I said, the cover itself I'm looking at here has nothing to do with the book at all. I don't know why they've got this cover, but that's all I'll say about that. The other book I want to talk about is Dark Gods by T.E.D. Klein. Michael K. Vaughan has mentioned this several times in the past about it being a really good book. It's another book of short stories, or maybe novelettes. I don't know what you call them. They're about 75 pages apiece. There's 4 stories in this. Other than the last story, I'm not sure why it was called Dark Gods, but I guess the more I think about it, the more I can see why. This book wasn't what I was expecting. I was expecting something a little wild, uh, something more dark god type uh, book, but what I got were more literary stories. And there was just an undertone of horror throughout them. And the end usually there was some kind of, it wasn't really not a twist ending, but the ending was the culmination of all that underpinning of horror that ran throughout the story. Um, the different story, it says in here, the collection opens with Children of the Kingdom, a beautifully crafted chiller that gradually reveals the horror that lurks behind the shadows of the city. It's about a guy and who's putting his grandfather in a home, and there is some strange going ons in the city, and there's some kind of creatures that you get the sense that they're there, but you don't really know if it's happening or not. And they talk to a guy who says he's some kind of, I forget if he's some kind of priest or what, but um, it's just a really weird story. But it's very, like I said, it's a literary horror. It's, and I don't mean that to deride regular horror, but it just, most of the stories read like literary stories with a hint of horror, which became a full on horror at the end. The next one in Petey, George and Phyllis and the guests at their housewarming think their new rural retreat is quite a steal, unaware that foreclosure in a particular monstrous form is heading their way. It's the whole story is mostly about a housewarming party, and they find very strange things in the house that have been left by the previous owner. They say the previous owner was crazy. He was put in an institution. You see glimpses throughout the story of this person in being kept from killing himself because he's so whacked out of his skull. And I have an idea of why it was called Petey too, but I won't say. I'll let you decipher that yourself. But it it was a very strange story, but it was mostly, like I said, it's kind of read like a literary story about a housewarming with just an undercurrent of horror that comes full bore at the end. There's the insidiously terrifying black man with a horn, an homage to Lovecraft. A chance encounter with a missionary over the Atlantic lures a traveler into a web of ancient mystery and fiendish retribution. Uh, it's about an older man that meets this missionary who feels like he's being followed, and the guy gives the missionary, he's moving to the place where this the main character's sister is from, and he says that he'll give her number, and he doesn't know why he does it, but he just does. And so they hit off a friendship, and then uh, strange things start to happen, and he sees a creature with a horn. There's a little bit of racial undertones too here, which is funny because it's Lovecraft, and Lovecraft was so racist. But I love Lovecraft, don't get me wrong, but the guy was obviously racist. But it's about a some kind of creature from an African tribe that has a horn that you're not quite sure what they're doing with it. And there's these, again, some creatures come into play. The main character finds a exhibit at one of the museums, and he lives in New York City, and it has to do with what this missionary was talking about, and he finds that strange, and then the exhibit mysteriously vanishes because someone said there was something wrong with it. And it's just, again, very strange, very spooky story. And in Nadelman's God, the protagonist discovers degree by shocking degree that the demons of our imagination are not always imaginary. Now, I would say that Nadelman's God was probably my favorite story of the bunch. Uh, it's about a guy who wrote some poetry in college, and one of somebody that was an acquaintance of his that knew about this poetry, that worked at a college magazine that he worked on, was representing a band, and they did a song based on one of his poems about some kind of dark god, which is where the only way I could see this got its title. And the guy, after the song comes out, the guy gets a letter from some white trash type guy that says he's a huge fan, and thanks him for doing it and wants to know if he can ask him questions and stuff. Well, the whole thing goes south from there and just really devolves into a strange story. I mean, he meets the guy, and the guy's trying to put together this god that he created, and strange things start happening, and the end is just really spooky. But I think Nadelman's God was my favorite story of the bunch. I liked Dark Gods. I thought it was, again, it was more literary than I was expecting. I was expecting a little more um, just kind of straight up horror, but I really liked it, and the stories stayed with me after I read it, and I think I will read more T.E.D. Klein. He didn't write a whole lot, but most of it is available. There's a few things available on Kindle and one other book that's available in print. This one had been out of print for a long time, and when Michael K. Vaughan first recommended it, I looked it up, and the only way you could get it was as a trade, well, not a trade, but as a mass market paperback size. And the only ones I could find were on eBay, and they looked like they'd been kicked down a sewer drain and been bent to pieces and torn up and everything, and they were at least like $40 or $50. And I was just like, I just can't pay that for something in that kind of shape. But I just happened to look again recently on Amazon, and somebody knew it's Drugstore Indian Press. It's a UK company, British company, and they brought it back into print, and so I immediately ordered a copy. So it is in print now again. For how long I don't know, but I enjoyed it, and I'm glad that Michael K. Vaughan recommended it because it was a really good book of stories. I've gone on way too long. I was afraid I wasn't going to have enough to talk about because of my trouble with the first book, but like I said, the Ramsey Campbell, I'm not so high on, but the T.E.D. Klein I am. I really enjoyed it, and I would recommend him this Dark Gods if you can pick it up. Like I said, it's in print again right now, so it's now's the time to grab it while it is. And he wrote one novel called The Ceremonies, and it looks really interesting. And I will probably get it. And then he has some nonfiction writing and another book of short stories. So I will probably be getting those and reading them at some future point. But I've held you too long. I hope this helps uh, clarify whether you should read these books or not. And again, I just didn't get the Ramsey Campbell one. And the TE Climb, though, I really enjoyed. So I thank you for tuning in, and I hope you all have a good week, and I'll see you next week.